I exposed my family's darkest secret and they disowned me. The second I spoke the truth about my perfect brother in a room full of people who were supposed to love me, I stopped being their daughter. It all happened at my father's 60th birthday party, a night that was supposed to be a celebration of him, of our family. In front of everyone, my aunts, my uncles, all our family friends who had known me since I was born, my mother stared at me with pure, undiluted venom in her eyes and said words that cut deeper than any knife. "You've ruined this family." My father, a man I'd spent my life trying to please, stood there with his face turning a shade of purple I'd never seen before, his chest heaving with rage. He didn't scream. It was worse. He just pointed a shaking, accusatory finger toward the grand oak door of our family home. "Get out," he choked out, the words strangling him. "Get out and never come back." And just like that, for speaking a few sentences of truth that had been suffocating me for years, I was erased. My entire life, my whole identity as a daughter, as a sister, it vanished in that one horrific moment. All because I refused to keep their ugliest, most devastating secret buried any longer. Growing up, my world balanced on two fundamental, unshakable truths. My brother, David, was perfect and I was not. He was the golden child, the sun around which our entire family universe revolved. He could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was the black sheep, the one who was always a little too loud, a little too opinionated, a little too much of everything they didn't want. And this wasn't some story I told myself. It was a dynamic our family actively, painstakingly cultivated. David's achievements were public monuments. His straight-A report cards weren't just praised, they were literally framed and hung in my father's home office, a gallery of his perfection. Mine, even with good grades, were met with disappointed sighs and the soul-crushing question, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" When David won a regional science fair in 8th grade for a model volcano that barely worked, my parents threw him a surprise party with a custom-made cake. A few years later, when I landed the lead role in the high school production of Our Town, a part one had worked on for months, they showed up 20 minutes late and left during intermission. My father later complained about the uncomfortable seating. That was it. The resentment between David and me wasn't a natural sibling rivalry. It was a wall they built between us, brick by painful brick. I wasn't just competing with my brother. I was competing with an idealized version of a son that I, as a daughter, could never ever be. For years I just accepted my role. It was easier. I was the difficult one, the scapegoat for any and all family tension. If my parents argued, it was because I'd been mouthy earlier that day. Something broke, I was the first one blamed. I learned to keep my head down, to swallow my achievements and to make myself small. But even as a kid I could sense something else was deeply wrong, something that had nothing to do with my C in algebra or my bad attitude. It was a thick, suffocating silence that would descend upon our house whenever certain topics came up. Old family pictures from before I was born, my mom's life before she met my dad, why she really had to leave her small hometown so suddenly. Any questions were shut down with a sharp, "That's in the past," or, "We don't talk about that." I learned quickly that it was safer not to ask. The secret, the real source of the rot in our family, began to unravel on my 25th birthday. I was spending the day helping my mom clean out the attic, a dusty, forgotten museum of our family's life. Tucked away inside an old, brittle shoebox, buried under her yellowed wedding veil, was a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, masculine. They were love letters, but they weren't from my father. They were from a man named Michael, and they were dated just months before my brother David was born. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read them. They told a story of a passionate, forbidden love affair. Of stolen moments in a world where my mother was already engaged to my father. Of a heartbreaking goodbye. The last letter, though, was the one that made my blood run cold. It was postmarked from the very town my mom had so abruptly left. In it, Michael begged my mother to tell him if the baby was his. He wrote, "I'll leave her. I swear it, Catherine. We can have a life together, a real family. I just have to know the truth. Please just tell me if he is mine." And there, in that dusty, silent attic surrounded by ghosts, it all finally clicked into place. The decades of secrets. The constant humming anxiety in our home. The real reason David was put on an untouchable pedestal and shielded from any and all criticism. His perfection wasn't just a preference. It was an absolute necessity. It was the only way to justify the massive, life-altering lie my entire family was built on. David wasn't just the golden child. He was the product of my mother's affair. The father he idolized, the man whose name he carried, was not his biological father. I carried that secret for 2 long years and it felt like a physical weight, a sickness in my stomach. Every family gathering became a torturous performance. I'd watch my father proudly call David my son, and the lie would echo in my ears. Every holiday, every shared laugh felt like a fraud. This deception was a poison, seeping into every corner of our lives, and I knew with a terrifying certainty that it was slowly killing me. The breaking point, the moment the pressure became too much to bear, came at my father's 60th birthday party. My mother's grand idea for a gift, the piece de resistance, was a professionally bound and researched ancestry book, tracing our family tree back for generations. The irony was so thick and bitter I felt like I was choking on it. As my dad unwrapped it, his face glowing with pride, I saw a flash of pure animal panic in my mother's eyes before she masked it with a brilliant smile. All night, my father paraded that book around the party, his voice booming with pride as he pointed to his great-grandfather the farmer, his grandfather the war hero, and finally his own name with David's branching right off it like a royal lineage. "The legacy continues," he declared, clapping a beaming David on the back. And David, my brother, just soaked it all in, oblivious and perfect and loved. I couldn't take it anymore. This wasn't just a lie. It was a cruel, elaborate stage play, and I was the only one in the audience who knew the script was fiction. I felt this surge of adrenaline, a desperate, overwhelming need for the truth no matter the cost. I walked over to my brother, my heart pounding against my ribs. "David," I said, my voice trembling so much I barely recognized it. "There's something you should know. Something that book leaves out." My mother's head snapped in my direction, her smile gone. "Don't you dare," she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous whisper that only I could hear. But it was too late. My dad had heard me. "What's going on?" he asked, his celebratory mood evaporating in an instant. The room quieted that I took a deep, shaky breath, the air feeling thin and sharp. The Mom didn't leave her hometown for a fresh start. She left because she was pregnant. I locked eyes with my mother, whose face was now a ghostly white canvas of horror. "And Dad, you weren't the father." The silence that followed was the heaviest, most absolute silence I have ever felt. It was a physical thing pressing down on all of us. David just stared at me, his perfect smile frozen on his face, his eyes wide with a childlike confusion. He looked from me to my mom, then to my dad, desperately searching for a denial, a laugh, anything to make it not true. But the denial never came. My father turned to my mother. It wasn't a look of shock or betrayal. It was pure white-hot rage, but not for the reason I had ever imagined. It was the fury of a man whose perfectly constructed world, his legacy, had just been detonated in front of everyone. And then he turned all of that rage on me. "How could you?" he roared, his voice cracking with the force of it. "How could you do this to him? To this family?" And in that horrifying moment, I understood the final, most painful piece of the puzzle. He'd always known. For 30 years, my father had known David was not his biological son. He had actively chosen the lie. He chose to raise another man's son as his own, to pour all his pride and love into him, and to cast me, his actual flesh and blood, as the outsider, the problem child. My mother, finally finding her voice, erupted into theatrical sobs. "You're a selfish, hateful girl. You have always been jealous of your brother. This is just your sick, twisted revenge, isn't it?" That's when I said the words that sealed my fate, the words that would echo in my mind for years. "He deserved to know the truth," I said, my voice finally steady and clear. "We all did. And that was it. That was the end." My uncle, my father's brother, grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly firm, and started pulling me toward the door. My cousins, people I'd grown up with, wouldn't even look at me. It was as if I was the one who had committed the ultimate sin. Not my mother for her affair, not my father for his 30-year deception, but me for daring to speak the truth aloud. As the heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, the last thing I heard was my father's voice, ragged with fury, yelling, "You have no family here." The first few weeks after the party were a blur of raw pain and utter disbelief. My phone calls went straight to voicemail. My texts, filled with desperate pleas to just talk, went unanswered, marked only by the cold green delivered status. Finally, the delivered disappeared altogether. I was blocked. My emails vanished into a digital void. When I drove to the house a week later, my key wouldn't turn in the lock. He'd had them changed. I was completely, utterly alone. Being disowned is a strange and brutal kind of grief. It's like a death, but you're the ghost, forced to haunt a world that has unanimously decided you no longer exist. I completely spiraled. I replayed that night over and over, questioning my sanity, my memories, everything. Was I the monster they all said I was? My entire life I had been fed the narrative that I was difficult, too sensitive, just fundamentally wrong. This spectacular rejection felt like the final, irrefutable confirmation. The shame was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket that made it hard to breathe. I felt like I had done something so monstrous that I was unworthy of family, of love, of anything. The final, most devastating blow came from David, the one person I thought naively that I was doing this for. A week after the party, before he blocked me on everything, he sent me one last text message. It said, "I don't know who my father is, but I know who my sister isn't. You destroyed my life. I hope you're happy." His world had been shattered, and instead of being angry with the people who had lied to him for 3 decades, he aimed all of his pain and rage directly at me. I was the easier target. The loneliness was the hardest part. It was a constant, gnawing presence. The first Thanksgiving came and went in total silence. On my birthday, my phone remained dark. I'd be scrolling through social media and a photo would pop up from a cousin, a family barbecue, a holiday party, and I'd see them all there, smiling, laughing, living their lives as if there wasn't a gaping hole where I used to be. It was a constant, sharp reminder that their world was spinning on just fine, maybe even better without me in it. I had to learn how to be a person all on my own, to build an entirely new life from the rubble of my old one. That first year was about one thing and one thing only: survival. I found a therapist, a kind woman with gentle eyes who helped me understand I wasn't the villain in this story. She showed me that I grew up in a dysfunctional family system built on a foundation of secrecy, and that I didn't create the poison. I just finally, bravely exposed it. In our weekly sessions, I learned to actually listen to my own feelings and trust my own reality, something that had been systematically trained out of me since I was a child. I learned that my desperation for the truth wasn't revenge. It was a healthy person's reaction to an unhealthy environment. Slowly, painstakingly, I started to rebuild. I leaned hard on the 2 friends who stuck by me, who had seen the cracks in my family for years. They listened without judgment, brought me groceries when I couldn't get out of bed, and reminded me that I wasn't worthless. They became my real family. They showed up for quiet movie nights when the loneliness was too much, and they sat with me on my first Christmas completely alone, making a new tradition of Chinese food and bad holiday films. I started to learn that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you. It's about who loves you for your truth, not in spite of it. I took all the wasted energy I used to spend begging for my family's approval and I poured it back into myself. I went back to school and got a professional certification in graphic design, something I had always dreamed of but never pursued. I started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned as a teenager because my parents called it messy and unproductive. I filled canvases with color, with anger, with sadness, and eventually with hope. I was finding my own voice, not the quiet, apologetic one I used at home, but a strong, confident one. I was finally becoming the person I was always supposed to be, outside the suffocating shadow of their lies. About a year ago, my aunt, my mother's sister, reached out to me. Her number popped up on my phone and my heart nearly stopped. He told me things at home were not good. David, she said, was struggling badly with his identity and was in intensive therapy. His relationship with our parents was full of anger and strain. My father's health, she mentioned pointedly, had taken a significant turn for the worse because of all the stress. She said my mother cries all the time, telling anyone who will listen that she just wants her daughter back, wondering if I'll ever forgive them. Then she asked the question I had both dreaded and longed to hear for years. Will you consider coming home? For their sake. I listened to her whole story, and for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar pang of anger or the deep well of sadness. I just felt a quiet, solid strength inside me. I told her I had already forgiven them, not for them but for me. I had to let go of the bitterness that was poisoning my new life. But forgiveness and reconciliation are 2 very different things. Going back to that house would mean stepping back into the role of the problem, back to being the person I was. I couldn't do it. I had already built a new home for myself. A life founded on honesty, mutual respect, and peace. Blowing up my family's deepest secret cost me everything I thought I wanted. It cost me my parents, my brother, and the only home I'd ever known. But in return, it gave me back the one thing I actually needed: myself. I am no longer the black sheep, the scapegoat, or the problem child. I'm just me. And for the first time in my entire life, that feels like more than enough. The silence from them is still there, a permanent fixture in the background of my life, but my life itself isn't silent anymore. It's full of real connection, genuine laughter, and the kind of unshakable peace that only comes from living in your truth. And that's a legacy I'm proud to build all on my own. Have you ever had to deal with a toxic family dynamic or expose a difficult truth that changed everything? I'd be honored if you would share your story in the comments below. And while you're down there, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It's so important to know we're not alone. See you on the next video.